Everywhere, bells are pealing, bright colors lighting up the sky. It's July 4th, 1876. America is 100 years old, and a new, modern nation is about to be born. Carrying the country forward into the 20th century will be remarkable people. Americans will fight for liberty at home and abroad. They will see freedom challenged, freedom thwarted, and freedom won. After a devastating civil war, it's a boom time in America, and industry leads the way. 1 million men return home and immediately find work in the coal mines, lumber mills, iron forges, machine shops, and clothing factories, ready to rebuild the nation.
The period between the end of the Civil War and the turn of the 20th century was a time of massive change in American life. Population rose tremendously and very fast. People were moving into the cities. There was lots of motion on the continent. Also the speed of transport. You could move more quickly, both across the ocean to get to the United States and then across the continent by the railway, which was a major change that took place. The expansion of the railways was just tremendous after the Civil War.
Americans love these iron horses, as they will all the machines that promise freedom. The railroads carry thousands of Americans west. Out of the wilderness, these new pioneers will carve farms and businesses, homes and churches. And out of this passage west, a determined new breed of industrialists, speculators, and financiers will make millions. The railroads have done more than change the frontier. They have virtually put an end to it. American Indians have been pushed into reservations and to the edge of the continent. The first Americans are in a war for their very survival, fighting to hold on to the last of their ancient worlds. Oregon, 1877, the year after the centennial. The Nez Perce, a small tribe that once welcomed Lewis and Clark and which proudly had never killed a white man, refuses to relinquish their land and move to a reservation. Rather than surrender to American troops, Joseph, their chief and a master military strategist, chooses resistance.
Chief Joseph is a very fascinating person in history. He was able to lead a small group of his people in a desperate bid for freedom, being chased constantly by U.S. troops, stopping the fight, winning some skirmishes, and almost reaching Canada, where he hoped that he would be able to live free with his people. But they were stopped short of Canada and were forced to surrender by the United States military. Chief Joseph, as many other Indian resistors before him, was shipped off to exile in Indian territory.
Chief Joseph, upon surrendering.
I am tired of fighting. Our chiefs are killed. It is cold and we have no blankets. The little children are freezing to death. My people, some of them, have run away to the hills and have no blankets, no food. Hear me, my chiefs. I am tired. My heart is sick and sad. From where the sun now stands, I will fight no more, forever.
By 1890, the Indian Wars are over. Thousands are dead, and all tribes like the Nez Perce, the Apache, the Sioux, lose their freedom. That same year, the Bureau of the Census officially declares that the frontier is closed. The continent is settled. Now the spirit of optimism, opportunity, and industry takes hold of the land. A whole new nation is being invented, bursting out of the American heartland to create a new revolution, a great industrial revolution. He is just a small-town American, all but deaf since boyhood. He has hardly any schooling, and he loves practical jokes more than almost anything else in the world. Yet, he embodies the new spirit of dedication, spunk, and invention. He is better than the storybook Horatio Alger. His name is Thomas Alva Edison. He has a knack for making things work. A knack he will use to bring light and sound and pictures and power to the whole world. In his lab in Menlo Park, New Jersey, his invention factory, Edison makes amazing things happen. And he collaborates with other inventors like Alexander Graham Bell to bring their visions to life. His inspiration and insight help create a generation of wizards. For all his 1,000 other patents, it is his quest for light that obsesses the inventor. Declares an ever-confident Edison,
"The electric light has caused me the greatest amount of study and has required the most elaborate experiments. I was never myself discouraged or inclined to be hopeless of success. I cannot say the same for all my associates."
By finding a way to keep a filament burning in a vacuum bulb, Edison defeats the night. In years to come, he and his lab would create a system for bringing electric power to entire towns and cities. With electricity comes not only light, but more freedom to see and hear and to communicate. And with one of his inventions, the motion picture camera, Edison sets us on a road of dreams that captivates us still. The movies become the quintessential American art, a fantasy world of lovers and losers, heroes and villains, strong silent cowboys and fierce Indians. A world where we can laugh at ourselves. Inventors like Edison give industry the practical tools to build a new nation. But it will take a new breed of aristocrats to make America an economic colossus. A handful of men will rule business and the nation for half a century with their brilliance and blind ambition. They know no bounds, recognize no authority but their own.
The people who were called the robber barons by their critics, and I suppose would be called industrial titans by their admirers, were really the agents of the first stage of modern industrial capitalism. An enormous number of the big corporations that are still a major part of American life were created in the late 19th century, most of them by very talented, very aggressive, often very ruthless individual entrepreneurs. And their achievements are extraordinary. They transformed the American economy, but they also did so very often in a very brutal, harsh way, which is what led them to be called the robber barons.
The most powerful of these men is J.P. Morgan, the man who finances the railroads and the rest of American industry. He has a vision of a bold new industrial nation towering over the world, and he makes it happen. His origins are hardly humble. His father is a rich international banker who worries over his son's often impulsive judgments. Young Morgan gets a big boost from the Civil War. He sees the conflict as a business opportunity, not a cause, and profits greatly. He'll soon control 4 of the 6 major railroads in the country, banks, insurance companies, industrial corporations, a financial empire worth billions. At a lavish dinner party in 1900, a close associate of Andrew Carnegie convinces Morgan to buy out Carnegie's vast steel holdings. A few weeks later, Carnegie scrawls the asking price of $480 million on a piece of scrap paper. And U.S. Steel, the world's largest industrial enterprise, is created. Andrew Carnegie, unlike Morgan, had not been born with the proverbial silver spoon in his mouth. Carnegie is a genuinely self-made man. From his immigrant father, an impoverished Scottish weaver, young Carnegie learns both the value of a dollar and the importance of social justice. Working as a railroad official, Carnegie grasps a simple idea better than anyone else. You can't build railroads without rails, so he invests in iron, eventually controlling the industry. And when iron gives way to steel, he dominates that industry too.
There was tremendous resentment of the way the wealthy used their wealth. That was one reason why people like Andrew Carnegie and to some degree John D. Rockefeller were such conspicuous philanthropists, because they were concerned that the wealthy class was going to become a target of national anger if they didn't legitimize themselves in some way in the eyes of the nation. That worked for Carnegie. He became, after having been one of the most brutal steel barons of the late 19th century, he became, in the last years of his life, a sort of fuzzy, beloved philanthropist.
In his Gospel of Wealth, Carnegie proclaims,
"This, then, is held to be the duty of the man of wealth: to set an example of modest, unostentatious living, shunning display and extravagance; to consider all surplus revenues which come to him simply as trust funds; to produce the most beneficial results for the community, the man of wealth thus becoming the mere trustee and agent for his poorer brethren."
Still, many prominent citizens wonder if the growing gap between rich and poor will do lasting harm to American democracy. America is now a very different country from the nation of small farmers and merchants imagined by Thomas Paine and Thomas Jefferson. Little more than 100 years after the Revolution, the robber barons have transformed it into a corporate giant and made the U.S. the world power in oil, steel, finance, and communications. The hands and hearts needed to build modern America are willingly supplied by immigrants. First, Irish, Chinese, Scandinavian, and German. Then Jewish, Russian, Italian, Greek, Polish, and Lithuanian. Some are escaping the tyranny of prejudice. Most, the tyranny of poverty. 25 million people will touch our shores between 1865 and 1914. Most at New York's Ellis Island. Many arrive eager to build new lives and raise families. These greenhorns come to stay, like a young Lithuanian Jew named Pauline Newman.
Of course, we came steerage. That's the bottom of the ship and 3 layers of bunks. Of course, you can understand that it wasn't all that pleasant when the people on the second bunk or the third bunk were ill. You had to suffer and endure not only your own misery, but the misery of the people above you. We went by wagon to my brother's apartment on Hester Street and Essex on the Lower East Side. We were all bewildered to see so many people coming and going and shouting.
The new immigrants, men, women, and children, go to work in the factories of soot-stained cities like New York and Boston. They come looking for freedom and opportunity, and they are ready to sweat for it. The hours are long, the conditions bleak, so newcomers like Rose Schneiderman challenge the owners to improve things. Rose works in a New York factory.
After I had been working as a cap maker for 3 years, it began to dawn on me that we girls needed an organization. The men had organized already and had gained some advantages, but the bosses had lost nothing, as they took it out on all of us. We were helpless. No one girl dare stand up for anything alone. Matters kept getting worse.
Like many immigrants, Rose Schneiderman and Pauline Newman are committed to holding America to its democratic ideals. They will become labor organizers, enduring the threats of the owners and the resistance of male workers.
It turns out that women in this period really want to be organized, many of them, and in the garment industries, it turns out that they form the backbone of what becomes the International Ladies Garment Workers Union first, and then the Amalgamated Clothing Workers Union, and then a little later on some of the textile workers unions and so on, are all built out of women's organizing.
Between 1881 and 1905 alone, 37,000 strikes involving 7 million workers in virtually every industry rocked the country. The owners win battle after battle, often with the help of the police and the National Guard. It will take decades, but courage and conviction will eventually transform labor conditions and the lives of working people throughout America. At the end of the century, America is ready to flex its muscles. It is now playing on a global stage, competing with its European cousins for power and prosperity. No one better embodies this new America than Theodore Roosevelt, the rough-riding hero of the Spanish-American War and former governor of New York. In 1901, when an assassin's bullet fells President McKinley, Roosevelt, his vice president, becomes the youngest chief executive ever. He is 42 years old. Teddy Roosevelt is the child of privilege and power. Yet he had been touched with the spark of compassion and social reform by his minister father, in an age when the wealth of the nation is controlled by a very few.
There's a massive reaction to this concentration of great wealth. And people like Theodore Roosevelt, for example, who uses the expression malefactors of great wealth to describe the robber barons, begin to argue that we have to sort of balance the scales, that we have to equalize the kinds of opportunities available to the ordinary individual.
Many influential men, J.P. Morgan among them, consider Roosevelt a loose cannon that they can't control, precisely because he is so passionate and unpredictable.
The important thing about Roosevelt is that unlike his predecessors, who when there was a strike would send in the militias, Roosevelt's attitude was he was not going to stop the strikes by force, but he was going to force both sides, worker and employer, to sit down at the table and negotiate.
We don't wish to destroy corporations, but we do wish to make them serve the public good.
Out of this complex new America emerges an entrepreneur with a modern vision of industry. He is a real American, raised on a Michigan farm by his Irish immigrant father and educated in public schools. From early on, he has a genius for machines, and inspired by Edison's example, decides to set the world on its ear by perfecting the horseless carriage. His name is Henry Ford, and cars are his game. In 1908, he introduces a new car, the Model T. It's a hit, but too expensive for the average Joe. A chance visit to a meatpacking plant changes all that. Ford wonders why cars can't be mass-produced on an assembly line, quickly, piece by piece. By 1916, Ford has come up with the ultimate American product, a good, cheap car for the multitude. For workers, the assembly line is repetitive and monotonous. Ford decides to pay his workers double the wage of most other factory work, up to $5 for an 8-hour day, at a time when 10 hours is still the norm. In a brilliant move, Ford keeps his people motivated and also out of unions. And he invents the modern American worker, a consumer who can purchase the product he creates. The car is a whole new kind of freedom, and people love it. Americans are on the go, and nothing will stop them. While America prospers, Europe goes to war in 1914 over who will control the globe and all its resources. Although sympathetic to Great Britain, President Woodrow Wilson is determined to keep the nation out of the Great War. For Wilson, social reform, what he calls the new freedom, is a more pressing goal.
We have been proud of our industrial achievements, but have not hitherto stopped thoughtfully enough to count the human cost. The cost of lives snuffed out, of energies overtaxed and broken, the fearful physical and spiritual cost to the men and women and children upon whom the dead weight and burden of it all has fallen pitilessly.
But World War I will not go away. Although many Americans strongly oppose intervention, in 1917, Wilson sends boys overseas to fight for the first time in a major European conflict. It will be, Wilson declares, the war to end all wars.
We shall fight for the things which we have always carried nearest to our hearts. For democracy, for the right of those who submit to authority to have a voice in their own government, and the rights and liberties of small nations, and to make the world itself at last free.
Yet, in the name of freedom, many Americans suddenly find their own liberty curtailed.
During World War I, even though Woodrow Wilson said this was a war to make the world safe for democracy, the mobilization for the war unleashed a tremendous repression of free speech in the United States. The Sedition Act, the Espionage Act, passed by Congress, virtually made it illegal to criticize the government during World War I. And states passed laws even far more sweeping. One made it illegal to speak German anywhere, on the telephone and in private homes. There was a kind of hysteria to create a national unity because there was a lot of opposition to the war, and the government moved to try to suppress that.
Well-known anti-war leaders like socialist Eugene V. Debs and political firebrand Emma Goldman are among thousands who are imprisoned during the war or deported immediately after. Yet, this blow to freedom does not go unanswered. In the early 1920s, Supreme Court Justices Holmes and Brandeis reaffirmed the importance of the Bill of Rights and the need to protect freedom of speech and press for all Americans. Civil liberties, as we understand them today, are born in the wake of World War I. With Europe devastated, the United States emerges from the war easily the most powerful nation in the world. During the war, American women continued to fight a crucial political battle.
They wanted their rights as citizens, they wanted their rights to make careers in the same way as men, to have economic freedoms that the laws generally did not give them. They wanted those changes too. But the right to vote became for them a powerful, motivating idea and a goal that swept, especially by the second decade of the 20th century, millions of women onto a political bandwagon that finally, by the time of World War I, was virtually unstoppable.
After nearly a century of struggle, their quest finally ends in triumph. In 1919, Congress passes the 19th Amendment, giving women the right to vote. The war over, the nation dedicates itself to making and spending money with unashamed enthusiasm. As President Calvin Coolidge declares, the business of America is business. As always, every American wants a shot at success. A few enterprising citizens, like Al Capone, find a way to make their fortunes out of a new law banning the sale of alcohol. Prohibition. A joyful sound charges the air of the 20s. It comes out of the African-American neighborhoods of New York, Kansas City, and New Orleans, the first notes of a vibrant cultural renaissance that will change the pulse of America. It is jazz. Some Americans help the nation soar. One young man challenges the gods of the air and captures America's imagination. The lone eagle, Charles Lindbergh. He will truly look death in the eye, the first man to cross the Atlantic alone and non-stop. New York to London in 33.5 hours in a monoplane he designs himself, called the Spirit of St. Louis. It is a daring feat that astonishes the whole world. Yet, for all the wonders, the 20s are also a time of violence and intimidation. Millions of Americans want to keep the country pure, and the Ku Klux Klan marches in the nation's capital to protect America from Catholics, immigrants, Jews, and blacks. Very soon, all Americans will face a devastating change, far worse than anything they could imagine. The bubble of the 20s is bound to burst. And burst it does with the stock market crash on October 29th, 1929. In an instant, the freedom of the 20s evaporates. Factories, banks, and businesses shut down across the nation. Tens of thousands of families lose their homes, and hundreds of thousands of workers lose their jobs. But America is not so easily vanquished. It needs a leader who understands the depth of the crisis, who can inspire a nearly defeated nation. Franklin Delano Roosevelt.
So first of all, let me assert my firm belief that the only thing we have to fear is fear itself. Nameless, unreasoning, unjustified terror, which paralyzes needed effort to convert retreat into advance.
Roosevelt sweeps into office, promising a new deal for the American people. Now he has to make good and put people back to work. Roosevelt's vision creates a startling new bond between the government and the people. For the first time in American history, people depend on government programs to protect them, provide economic security, and to preserve their freedoms.
And these programs were designed to provide minimal levels of security, but still to provide security nonetheless. And if you take them as a package, what this legislation did was to encourage Americans to believe that they were no longer alone, that government did have some responsibility to pitch in and help out at moments when economic factors that were beyond the control of ordinary people did in fact prevent them from earning a living and sometimes even from surviving.
As the nation slowly regains its confidence and self-esteem, African Americans still struggle against a system known as Jim Crow. This legal segregation has been in force for decades, preventing black people from exercising their rights as citizens.
After slavery, what you got was a culture of slavery in Jim Crow laws. The emphasis on the fact that African Americans did not belong, that they would never become members of the political or moral community, that they'd never participate fully in this society as equal citizens, which is what freedom in the sense of democracy means.
Even fame is no protection, as one of the world's best-known contraltos, Marian Anderson, discovers one spring day in 1939. Marian Anderson has been invited to perform in Washington, D.C. by Howard University, which applies to the Daughters of the American Revolution for the use of Constitution Hall. The DAR decides they will not allow an African American to sing in their concert hall. Many people are outraged, including the First Lady, a champion of civil rights and a lifelong member of the DAR, Eleanor Roosevelt. She resigns from the group, and with her support, the federal government offers the Lincoln Memorial as the new site of the concert. When 75,000 people, black and white, turn out for the concert, the event becomes a landmark day for the emerging civil rights movement.
All I knew as I stepped forward was the overwhelming impact of that multitude. I had a feeling that a great wave of goodwill poured out from these people, and my heart beat like mad, loud and strong, as if it wanted to say something.
Yesterday, December 7th, 1941, a date which will live in infamy. The United States of America was suddenly and deliberately attacked by naval and air forces of the Empire of Japan. With confidence in our armed forces, with the unbounding determination of our people, we will gain the inevitable triumph So help us God.
The Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor draws the United States into the global war against Hitler and fascism that had begun in 1939. Everything America stands for is at stake, and 362,000 young Americans of every background and race will give their lives to preserve what FDR calls the four freedoms.
President Roosevelt, even before the United States was in the war, announced that the four freedoms, freedom of speech, freedom of religion, freedom from want, and freedom from fear, were the principles that embodied the American cause and the British cause and set our country against the Nazis. And indeed, the very contrast between Nazi Germany and the United States served to elevate the principle of liberty, of civil liberties, of freedom of speech, of pluralism in the society, as opposed to the master race idea of the Nazis.
On the home front, the president charges the nation to become the arsenal of democracy to defeat the Axis. And it has the human and industrial power to do so.
During the Depression, women are, of course, discouraged from working except where they need to work. And women are told, basically, that if they can stay home and leave the jobs for the men, they should. And then World War II comes along, and women are desperately needed in the factories and in the plants, and to take over the jobs that men have left behind, but also to take over the new jobs that the war creates. And the message shifts dramatically from "you're not wanted" to "it's your patriotic duty to enter the workforce."
Eager to do her duty, Rosie the Riveter will help carry the nation to victory and experience some economic freedom in return. As a woman named Peggy Terry remembers,
we were just happy having a job, being able to eat and pay your rent and buy our kids some shoes and a few other things that they hadn't had. Women just came to realize that they could do a lot of things if they were allowed. Once the war kind of liberated them, it's never really quieted down since.
Every week during the war years, 90 million people flock to their local movie house to follow the boys, hoping and praying that they will return home soon. They watch week after week. The defeat of the Japanese Navy at Midway. The capture of German saboteurs on the east coast of the United States. Victory hard won at Guadalcanal. North Africa invaded. Fierce enemy resistance at Sicily, Salerno, and Anzio. The triumphant return to the Philippines. Bloody Tarawa. Americans at home will also witness the imprisonment of Japanese-American families in internment camps for the entire war, simply because of their Japanese ancestry, even though their sons too go overseas to fight and die in the service of freedom. One monumental moment will decide the fate of the war on the Western Front. The largest amphibious assault in history, driven by a massive Allied sea and air armada, and led by General Dwight D. Eisenhower. It is an event of power and glory and personal sacrifice. D-Day. According to a private named Felix Branham,
I've gone through lots of tragedy since D-Day. But to me, D-Day will live with me till the day I die, and I'll take it to heaven with me. It was the longest, most miserable, horrible day that I or anyone else ever went through.
The Germans surrender, May 7th, 1945. Nazism is crushed, and the depths of its horrifying crimes discovered with the liberation of the Nazi extermination camps, where millions of Jews and countless others have been murdered. In the Pacific, the Japanese continue to fight on.
We are now prepared to destroy more rapidly and completely every productive enterprise the Japanese have in any city. We shall destroy their docks, their factories, and their communications. Let there be no mistake. We shall completely destroy Japan's power to make war.
The U.S. decides to crush the Japanese with a terrible new weapon, the A-bomb, rather than to invade Japan and risk tens of thousands of American casualties. It will be dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Through enormous courage and sacrifice, America and her allies have won the war and vanquished the enemies of freedom and democracy. To most Americans, it seems that overnight, much of the world has fallen to a new enemy who hates freedom above all things: the Soviet Union, once the ally that turned the tide of the war. It is a new era of anxiety and fear, the Cold War. Combating communism across the globe will become America's mission. And in 1950, the Cold War will warm up very quickly with armed hostilities in Korea. At home, a new revolution is taking place, a revolution of affluence. America has come out of the Depression and the war stronger and more powerful than before. And the truest of all American dreams, owning a home and a small piece of land, suddenly seems within everybody's reach, even if the houses don't exactly stand out from the neighbors. The post-war years are a time of plenty and pleasure. The 40-hour work week, 2 weeks paid vacation, weekends off, money in the bank, hot running water, a chicken in virtually every pot. It is the life of Riley. But not for everyone. With the threat of communism abroad, Americans begin to look for enemies at home, and they find them. These witch hunts are led by people like Senator Joseph McCarthy.
We've got to clean out those who are responsible, Mr. Chairman. In conclusion, those who are responsible, either knowingly or because they were simple dupes, covering up communists and traitors, not dead ones but live ones.
In many areas of American life, in the arts, in academia, in schools, in government, in the intellectual world, in the political world, there was tremendous repression. People were in danger of losing their jobs, losing their livelihoods, being shunned by their communities, just for being accused of some kind of heresy or radicalism.
Mr. Bieberman. Mr. Bieberman.
Go ahead, ask
Mr. Bieberman. Are you a member of the Communist Party, or have you ever been a member of the Communist Party?
Are you a member of the Communist Party?
Are you now, have you ever been a member of the Communist Party?
The real damage in this era was the intimidation, the degree to which people simply ceased speaking their minds because they were afraid of the consequences.
The struggle for racial equality heats up seriously on a December evening in 1955. After a long day of work, Rosa Parks, a 43-year-old African-American seamstress and an active member of the state NAACP, boards a Montgomery, Alabama public bus and heads for the rear, in accordance with the law. The back is filled, so she takes a seat near the middle. Several stops later, the driver picks up several white passengers and calls out, "Niggers, move back." As Rosa Parks recalls,
on the buses, if white persons got on, the colored would move back if the white section was filled. It did not seem proper, particularly for a woman, to give her seat to a man. All the passengers paid 10 cents, just as he did.
Rosa Parks refuses to budge, and she is soon arrested for violating the city's transport laws. African-American leaders call for a citywide boycott of the buses. During the next months, a charismatic young minister, Martin Luther King, takes center stage. A leader who will galvanize an entire generation with his vision of nonviolent change and equality for all.
We still advocate nonviolence with passive resistance and still determined to use the weapon of love. We are still insisting emphatically that violence is self-defeating, that he who lives by the sword will perish by the sword.
It will take a decade of beatings and bombings and the murder of both black and white activists. But the civil rights movement demands that America live up to its ideals of freedom and justice for all, and nobody is going to back down.
The civil rights movement, which began in the mid-1950s and reached its peak in the mid-1960s, really reinvigorated the idea of freedom in the United States and pointed up the gap, you might say, between the humanitarian, broad, principled professions of the Cold War, in which the United States was the leader of the free world, and the reality that millions of black Americans were living in a state of, let us say, semi-freedom.
With the election of John F. Kennedy, many Americans feel a new sense of optimism. Initially reluctant, JFK officially welcomes Martin Luther King and 250,000 other Americans to the nation's capital on August 28, 1963. This is the March on Washington.
I still have a dream. Yes. It is a dream deeply rooted in the American dream. I have a dream that one day this nation will rise up and live out the true meaning of its creed. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal.
Two pieces of paper, the Civil Rights Act and the Voting Rights Act, signed by President Lyndon Johnson in the mid-60s, changed the lives of African Americans more than anything since the Civil War.
This Civil Rights Act is a challenge to all of us to go to work in our communities and our states, in our homes and in our hearts, to eliminate the last vestiges of injustice in our beloved country.
What the Civil Rights Movement had to do away with the idea of African Americans as outsiders in their own society, that they're finally to be included as members of the moral community, the political community of America. And they achieved that. It was a very successful movement. In the course of doing that, however, they achieved something else. They shifted the focus back to the Bill of Rights. They emphasized the fact that freedom is not a static thing which you achieve once and for all, but something which you struggle for and something which you have to be always vigilant about.
The Civil Rights Movement not only transformed the status of black Americans, but inspired numerous other groups to use the same tactics and language to claim their own rights and freedoms. Other non-white minorities in this country, Asian Americans, Chicano Americans, American Indians, formed their own freedom movements inspired by the black struggle. The modern women's movement came right out of the civil rights movement, and many of the early women who were involved in feminism had already worked in the struggle for black civil rights. So it really transformed the meaning of freedom and gave it a new substantive meaning in American society, which went far beyond the confines of black America. It really affected everybody.
Inspired by the civil rights movement, a generation of young people, a student movement, not only challenges America to live up to its principles of individual freedom and social justice, it dares an entire society to transform the way it thinks and behaves. An ugly war in a distant land fuels their rebellion. Vietnam. If the civil rights movement had cut deep into the heart of America, Vietnam exposes its rawest nerves. The nation is at war with itself. Tragedy stalks the land. John Kennedy, Martin Luther King, and Robert Kennedy are all cut down in less than 5 years. It sometimes feels like the loss and pain of the 60s will cripple the country or even tear it apart.
All engine running. Liftoff. We have a liftoff.
Amid all the conflict and the chaos, some new heroes appear to revitalize the nation's faltering spirit.
Hello, Apollo 11. Houston, we'd like you to press on to star 44, over. Yeah, roger, roger.
Okay, Neil, we can see you coming down the ladder now.
Okay, Neil, we can see you coming.
That's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind. Roger, the EVA is progressing beautifully. They're setting up the flag now. It has a stark beauty all its own. It's like much of the high desert of the United States. It's different, but it's very pretty out here.
In the 1970s, the nation will endure difficult days, especially the downfall of a president.
Therefore, I shall resign the presidency effective at noon tomorrow. Vice President Ford will be sworn in as president at that hour in this office.
My fellow Americans, our Constitution works. Our great republic is a government of laws and not of men. Here, the people rule.
The nation would prevail, as it always had, still strong after 200 years, still resilient, still free.
There are a lot more Americans now than there used to be. We look a lot more different from one another now than we used to look. We speak many more languages, perhaps, than we used to speak. And yet, with very, very few exceptions, we're proud to claim the title of American. We would find it very hard to give that identity up. The freedom that colonials claimed at the moment of independence was a much smaller idea, I think, than the freedom that Americans now claim as their heritage, as their birthright. There is a line that reaches from Thomas Jefferson to the present day, from the notion that all men are being created equal to the present day. And the fact that we've stuck with that line and not been satisfied one way or another with what was passed on to us, that we have expanded the notion of human freedom, may be the greatest glory of the whole country.
We now face a new millennium, a new America. We have lived through revolution, civil war, social change, world war, and political upheaval. And through it all, Americans have proudly struggled to preserve and extend the promise of equality and freedom. With courage, with hope, with dedication, we have built a nation of greatness, a land where everyone has the unalienable right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. America.